All right. Hi, y'all. Thanks for joining my breakout room. My name is Althea. And yeah, let me just start sharing my screen and we can get into this. So, let me just PowerPoint going. All right. My project is titled Growing Resiliency Approaching Year-Round Food Security in the Greater Seattle Area. My site supervisor was Perry Ackworth, where I interned was the UW Farm, and my faculty advisor was Eli Wheat. So a little background, why look at food resiliency? And I think just briefly, more what is food resiliency if you're asking that question right now. If you've heard of food security, I think of that as kind of addressing the current needs of those who cannot access adequate food. And I think of food resiliency as doing that. And then on top of that, looking into the future of what actions we need to take to continue that and to ideally improve our system. So why look at food resiliency? Let me just zoom on in for y'all. In 2021, 10.3% of King County reported struggling with food insecurity. I got that off the City of Seattle food insecurity webpage. I'm happy to send along because they have a lot more info that's super helpful. So in some background to this topic, I was looking at kind of ensuring local year-round food resiliency amid a growing population, and some of the obstacles that we need to overcome. So some of those being prolonged time from harvest to plate. So this delay results in reduced nutritional value, diminished food quality, and food loss in that time of transport. And then secondarily, some other kind of background into these obstacles was a lack of political support. So a significant amount of funding in the form of subsidies as one aspect, which support monoculture industrial farming, making it challenging to transition to more sustainable and regenerative practices. And this was kind of my interest in looking at that method of farming in this project. But I think also worth noting that there can be stronger ties to the community in smaller scale farming and stronger ties to food loss prevention organizations like food banks. So here's a little picture of me and my team, and some volunteers after a shift. So my research question was, what does it take to increase urban food resiliency in the greater Seattle area year round? So my internship, as I mentioned, worked at the UW Farm, focused on an educational heritage orchard. As an aspect of my internship, I'm working as a communications coordinator, specifically focused on our weekly newsletter. So I conducted research and planning for the educational heritage apple orchard that's to be installed at the Center for Urban Horticulture site just east of the UW Seattle campus. And then more specific to my research question, I also interviewed farmers and food banks to better understand barriers and successes in current food resiliency efforts, and completed a literature review to kind of prep myself for those interviews and just to have a better background knowledge for the other components of this capstone experience. So the results, which I'll also get into the figures mentioned up top, some of the barriers which I first kind of want to look at, that I found from my interviews. So I guess common themes brought up of challenges mentioned by both farmers and food banks were communication gaps between farmers and food banks, which hindered efficient resource, so like food distribution, misalignment between food production timing, and community needs, which can lead to surpluses and shortages. And infrastructure needs, i.e. greenhouses, high tunnels, essentially infrastructure that allows weather and light to be less of a factor in what can be grown. So for my first figure that kind of looks at the qualitative findings of my interviews, I have farmer recommendations and food bank recommendations. I'm more than happy to delve into these in questions, but I do want to kind of just give y'all the spiel and then get more into the questions, just as I found myself running out of time. And then my more quantitative findings from my interviews were found through asking farmers and food banks to scale to various variables. So for farmers, I asked them to rate production food production from 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest. And I interviewed 5 farmers and 5 food banks. So you'll notice the highest possible score would be a 25 because I added all of their scores together on here. And then for food banks, I asked them to rate the need for fresh produce from 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest. So you'll notice the months on the x-axis, and on the y, the rankings of need and production. So you'll see the greatest disparities are in September, that late summer into fall, and then also in January, so that kind of peak winter. And again, more than happy to get into this, but just a quick note, I mean, one could expect during these times of generally more warmer weather and more light, there to be more food production. And when that is commonly happening, there's going to be more produce delivered to food banks, so less of a potential need. And then contrasting in the winter, there's going to be less produce given and a higher need because there's less available. So some more implications of this, of my research, were addressing the recommendations suggested would allow for a more resilient food system. So this would look like less chance of low periods of produce production. So those kind of winter times that I was mentioning, larger access to quality produce, and communities more connected and engaged with the food they eat. Some more broadly, implications: addressing barriers can facilitate increased community well-being and broader social well-being, essentially meaning that people getting enough food and nutritious food consistently can up community and social well-being. Another one, with a changing climate and growing regions, having diverse, ecologically healthy food systems is important to our future production of food. And as I mentioned in background, with a growing population, having resilient food systems will really only increase importance. And then investing in regenerative agriculture, so these like non-industrial farming methods, is not only ecologically advisable, as I mentioned right above, but also economically viable, which I'm happy to talk about more as well. And then just lastly, soil health and crops we grow are valuable in sequestering carbon. So when looking at the issue of climate change, the role that the food we eat and the food we grow can play in mitigating those effects. So with that, I'd like to just say my acknowledgements. I'd like to personally thank Perry Ackworth and the UW Farm for hosting my capstone and supporting my farming interests the past 2 years. I would like to thank Eli Wheat my faculty advisor and the reason I became introduced to farming, particularly regenerative farming, and the whole reason I've worked at the farm. And also my friends, my family, and of course my cat Olive. Yeah, so happy to open it up for questions now. Thank y'all for listening.